Our next speaker this afternoon is Lance Weiler, who was speaking to us last year about his second feature, Head Trauma. Since that time, he's been really busy, and one of the projects he's been working on is From Here to Awesome, which is a discovery and distribution festival, which has been experimenting with day and date strategies on traditional and non-traditional platforms. And he's going to give us a kind of overview of where he feels the kind of model of independent film is going to go from now on.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you, Liz, and thank you for an excellent team for putting together this event and for having me come and speak. I had such a great time last year, and it's nice to be back again. I want to start off with just kind of, if we could go back in a time machine for a moment. Tomorrow represents 10 years to the date that we were doing something with a little movie that we made called The Last Broadcast, which we made for $900 and went on to be distributed all over the world and has done very well. But what I think is very interesting about that and the fact that it's 10 years to the date is the democratization of film is very much here. And I talked about this last year, and it's even more true now in terms of there's so much out there, there's so much going on, it's very exciting. And I think in regards to the opportunities that affords are, whoops, actually, I'm sorry, I lost myself here. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. So anyway, the idea of the democratization of the tools is very exciting. But I think what's interesting, and M. Strange mentioned it with that Francis Ford Coppola comment about, some young fat girl from Ohio, is that the reality of the situation is, there are like skinny kids from Nebraska who are, basically have these huge market shares. This gentleman, Fred, has a show, basically has over 500,000 subscribers. He has 16 million channel views, and his videos have been viewed over 125 million times. So in a lot of ways, Fred is pulling in money from endorsements. Fred is, puts up something and tons of people are watching it. And you can't help but wonder, maybe traditional filmmaking is holding us back. Is there something that Fred knows that we don't know? As we slave away making these films and watch, a whole new generation come up behind us, who are totally immersed in the idea of instant push-button publishing out to millions of people. It's just kind of fascinating. So I think in some ways, maybe it really has to do with kind of a competitive environment that exists within film. We're competitive around information, contacts, and resources. We're competitive for funds, for festival slots. I mean, I can't tell you how many people bank on a major festival slot as being the entree into the world for themselves, only to find out later that there's just not enough room in that traditional model. For buyers' attention, for deals, and also around the windows of release. And for anybody that doesn't know what the windows of release are, they're basically kind of a structure. Traditional, you could argue that film festivals are the first window of release, then you have theatrical, pay-per-view, home video, pay cable, basic cable, network, television, and internet. And what's interesting is when you look and you can kind of compare it between, this is just a comparison between the home entertainment industry and the digital distribution, because there's a lot of promise. The idea of, well, digital distribution in this new form, so much more opportunity. What you see is literally a shifting of the gatekeeper. What you're seeing is literally the same amount of steps between you and the actual audience. And so what's interesting about that is it kind of puts us in a predicament, because in some particular ways, if you're always looking to go through these steps, and and I should state that each project is specific and it depends on what you want to do. But I think it's important to note that there doesn't have to be this many steps between you and the people that you're trying to reach. So if we say, okay, there's the competitive side, how do we actually go from here to awesome? How do we fund, create, distribute, and sustain work in new ways? Personally, I think it's kind of at the foundation of something that we've been working on, which is called From Here to Awesome. And what we decided to do was create kind of an R&D lab, an open source R&D lab, because we felt like there was a major gap between technology and entertainment. There was this chasm, and it was very difficult to figure out, like, okay, well, it's been democratized in terms of how I make the film, but then what? Where do I go? How do I get it out to somebody? How do I get it in front of an audience? Where do I start? What do I do? And we were watching as more and more things were kind of coming in as, both gatekeepers and proprietary technology and black box technology was kind of coming into play and kind of sucking up the opportunities. And so we thought, what we're going to do? We're going to try to create this open system where we'll experiment. We'll create open tools that we all can make use of. We'll create some open standards, and we'll put forth some recommendations for best practices. And so From Here to Awesome was formed, I guess actually it's almost a year. In January it'll be a year. But the important note is that this new movement is all about being collaborative, in our opinion. You can see it with being collaborative. Whoops, sorry. You can see it in terms of being collaborative. In our opinion, both the R&D lab, the whole purpose is that it's meant to be open and then we share it with people. And so the feeling is moving from competitive to collaborative is maybe where some of the answers lie. The idea that story, distribution, discovery, and community can all become collaborative. So if you look at the economy of scale, and as we just heard from Jamie or has been echoed throughout the day, the ability to kind of reach large volumes of people has value. That's how, that's why the studio system throws so much money into P&A. They, on average, upwards of $70 million per film, and they just throw it at the wall. They create a hollow relationship with the audience. It's a one-way conversation that's intended for people to fill seats, and that's it. Get their asses in the seats, get them to buy a DVD, get them to buy whatever Happy Meal, whatever we can get them to buy and consume, but that's it. They don't go any further, And so I think one of the strong assets that we have moving forward is the ability to say, okay, well, if we're going to open up, like the way Christy talked about at the beginning, the idea of transmedia storytelling, if we're going to open up and we're really going to have a collaborative community around filmmaking, we have to kind of consider the way that we're building the stories that we want to tell. Now, when I build the work that I do, I build it from the concept of consumption. The idea of like, okay, if all these new devices exist, if all these new ways, if people like the way I mentioned Fred is able to create work and get it out to millions of people, people are obviously consuming their media in different ways. So I like to kind of look at it and think about it in terms of like, okay, well, I have a presentation layer, which goes out to various, whether it's living rooms or rich media applications, which then bring it back into possibly gaming, or messaging, through IVR, which is phone-related stuff, which I talked about last year, and IM, or social apps, into community. In the center of it, for me, is always the media. It's like, okay, how can I get this media to kind of travel out? How can I get more people invested in it? How can I leave room for the audience, which is not actually an effective term, but the community, for them to feel engaged in it and to want to be a part of it? So one of the things that I think is really important, and this is something that we're doing with the Research and Development Project, is there's a thing known as data portability. Does anybody know what data portability is? Anybody in the audience? Okay. Well, data portability is the idea that it was originally started because people were so tired of having to log into all these different sites over and over and over again. Let me see a show of hands. How many people have Facebook profiles? Okay. How many people have MySpace profiles? How many people have blogs? Okay. How many people have Twitter accounts? Okay. How many people purchase off of Amazon? Okay. there's a lot of logging in going on. And so the idea with data portability was, can I take my data and be able to just port it to trusted sites so I don't have to constantly be logging in over and over and over again? So what we started thinking about that we thought was interesting was, well, why can't there be a data portability for films? You know, if we're building audiences across all these various outlets, whether it be MySpace, YouTube, people purchasing our work on Amazon, why can't we get some type of anonymous data around what those consumers are doing, what the audiences are doing? You know, and if we can get that and be able to start to string it together, then we can look at something that starts to play off the idea of an attention economy. Like, where are those people in the world? How are they consuming this media? You know, what are their migration patterns? Are there certain types of tagging that people write or certain types of content that they find themselves interested in? You know, and if you kind of look at that, then you get to the idea that at a certain point when you look at where the attention goes, then all of us in the room, kind of to Jamie's point, we all are distributors, right? So if we get to the point where we start to know how the attention is moving, and we get to a place where everybody becomes kind of a distributor, or you start to know more about your audience, then you can start to cross-pollinate it. So the idea that all of us in the room, if we make films, you know, you can obviously collect zip codes or emailing, you know, email addresses. But if you get to the point of where if I build 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 fans, and then other people start to build equal that amount, and it's global, then we get into millions of people. But how do you deal with sharing that information? And I think in some ways it can be done in an anonymous fashion that allows you to be able to exchange it. And then the idea being that once you have the data that way, you can move towards the idea of universal licenses, you know, and you can sell, screen, you know, share and remix. So that means that the audience can help you do that. And I don't mean to make it sound like it's a pyramid scheme, but the idea being that once people are kind of out there and they're evangelizing or hopefully involved in it, if they feel like they can give some stake back or get some stake from you, and there's an equal exchange, then possibly maybe there are some future models where the distribution and the sustainability rests squarely in the hands of the audience. So, you know, what I think is also an interesting kind of trait is the idea of, you know, can we actually create, you know, like a film social graph? You know, and a lot of the things I've been thinking about in terms of metadata, which is typically just descriptions around a movie. You know, what's the title, what's the running time, who's the cast, you know, the crew, who's in it. It's very classic, very dry, kind of relatively boring stuff. But what I think is kind of interesting is when you look, there's a whole social graph that already exists, you know, with various social networking profiles, things that you can pull from certain services. And I think what's interesting is, can we leave a room in that metadata for the audience to participate? So for example, let's just say that we are in a situation where we've made a film and we're letting people who are interested in a certain character within the movie or a certain location that we shot at. For instance, a lot of cameras now have GPS devices. It's not long before script supervisors will have GPS devices and they'll put it into their script reports and say, you know, this is where we were location-wise, this is the angle that we shot at. A lot of that stuff is done through the normal process anyway. But what if you opened up that data? You know, what if you opened it up in the way that now, when I was watching the film, I knew exactly when those various actors came into play. I knew where they were in terms of location in the real world and also within that story world. And what becomes interesting is, like, say you had something that was around, and I just had Friday the 13th in here as an example, but, you know, Jason Goes to Manhattan. I think there was a horrible version of the franchise that did something with that. But anyway, the idea that people could start to go to locations where a film shot, and then they could basically, you know, tag where they were, upload photographs and talk about it, you know, and basically have comments, and you could start to share all these things. Because I think the biggest problem that we have as being filmmakers is a film has a very short lifespan. You know, music has the ability to be repeated multiple times. And because it can be repeated, it can be, you know, accessed and sold in many interesting ways, licensed, all kinds of things. And so maybe, you know, not only audience helping us to distribute, but maybe allowing room for audience to build and share what they find interesting, either in the worlds around the stories that we tell, or in a way for them to meet each other. And I've seen that directly in games that I've run, where we've had millions of people playing them, even had people end up meeting and marrying each other, you know, who had never known each other before. Had those people who met and were married by another player from the game who happened to be a minister, and he married them, and then they had a theme wedding around the game. You know, so I know that sounds kind of crazy, but the point I'm trying to make with it is this idea of a film social graph, you know, puts it out there where maybe, you know, in some ways the audience wants to engage more, you know, and that's where you see such vibrant movement in fan fiction. You know, fan fiction has brought certain television series back to life. It's, you know, it's saved movies, and it's extended worlds, and it's a very vibrant community. So I think that there's something interesting in that idea of a film social graph. Now, experimentation, because it's great. You know, I'm laying out a bunch of theories and, you know, shooting for the sky and just talking about this stuff. But at the end of the day, you have to come back to Earth, and you have to say, okay, well, what's tangible? What's possible? There's only so many hours in the day. You know, what can I really do? So what we decided to do with From Here to Awesome, which was the first part of our experiment, was a day and date model for film festivals. Because in a lot of ways, we felt like the relationship with film festivals was kind of strained. You know, it was something where we wanted to see more of, you know, there was an opportunity there. Yes, you could go out in front of an audience, and a lot of the times you can ask for screening fees, but most people don't know that. Most people pay submission fees, and I'm not saying by any means that festivals are flush with money, but the principle being that there's an opportunity there. So what we decided to do with the first experiment through From Here to Awesome was we decided that we were going to do a day and date experiment. And basically what that meant is, if you remember the windows of release that I showed you, which are typically you go through this, you know, festivals into theatrical and so forth and so on, we decided, you know what, we're gonna open up the process of the film festival submission thing to the audience, and we're gonna encourage filmmakers to embrace social media. And what that basically means is, instead of taking a submission fee for the festival, we just ask people to make, you know, basically a short video and say, not just a trailer of the film, but why? Why are you making this, and why is the audience going to care about it? Because a lot of those hooks are the same hooks that you use for publicity. They're the same hooks that you're going to use to try to entice the audience. So we thought, you know what, why don't we put that right out there in the front, and we'll let the filmmakers kind of get a handle on who their audience is. Because a lot of the times what happens is you don't think about the audience until the end. You think, oh, well, you know what, I make films for people like me. You know, you know, if I make it, they'll come, you know, that kind of stuff. If I build it, they'll definitely be there. But, you know, 9 times out of 10, they won't, you know. So what we did was we had 115 submissions. 22 of those films were selected by audience, and they were selected by a number of measurements around social media. Like, how far did the media spread? You know, how many comments did things get? You know, how many places was the media embedded? Did people take it and then put it somewhere else? You know, was it taken from a blog and put into another blog? You know, where did it go? And I think what was really fascinating about that is you start to realize how fragmented that world is. You start to realize how many steps it takes to try to get something in front of people. And so out of those 22 films, we said, you know what we're going to do with this is we're going to demonstrate a model where the filmmakers retain all their rights. We're going to do a window with the festival. We just say, you know, for 6 months, say that you're going to be a part of the festival. We'll give you 90% directly from all the outlets, so you get 90 to 100% back from the various outlets. And then we help to day and date those films across all kinds of digital outlets, you know, iTunes, Hulu, Juiced, Netflix, and a host of others. And we were trying to do something with that experiment where we wanted to kind of put it right in the right place in terms of, like, okay, if festivals, which have the opportunity to be kind of distribution aggregation hubs, they have the ability to be limited window, kind of distribution opportunities. And so we thought, okay, if we lay this out, maybe we're helping to lay a framework where filmmakers can retain their rights, filmmakers can get 90 to 100% of that take, and we're just going to put it all out there transparently, and share all the information. And so we're starting to see film festivals that are now streaming movies at the same time that the festival is actually taking place. So you're seeing an element where day and dating, where a lot of people have issues with that in terms of traditional windows, offers some real opportunities for certain films, and we've seen direct response and some interesting things with From Here to Awesome. We also did some viewing on demand where we did certain theatrical, where the audience would actually vote on what they wanted to see, and they did it via cell phone, sitting in an audience and voting for what they wanted to see. And granted, that's a very rudimentary model. Earlier we heard about, on demand and the value of, community-driven programming. So we wanted to kind of experiment with that as well. So all these results will be up. We'll make them all available once we conclude the windows of everything and share, how well the films did on the various outlets, where, what kind of penetration did things get, and we'll make all that available. So speaking of open resources, the Workbook Project is an open resource where it has contributors from all over the world, and we have a theatrical mapping project where we're mapping venues all over the world. So if anybody knows of a good venue, you can go and you can put it there. So, and we have another thing called Mindshare, where people who are, basically involved in the outlet itself only goes so far. So a lot of filmmakers need additional help. So we have a number of experts who kind of step in and help them. And the idea of the Workbook Project is that eventually readers move their way to becoming experts and then share what they've experienced with the readers as a whole. And we actually have some people who started reading it 2 years ago who took a lot of the things into practice and are now out, like 4 of them are out traveling on a 35-city tour throughout the United States, employing a lot of the stuff that they've learned from the filmmakers who contribute to the project. So it's all about open discussion and debate. We did a series of events called DIY Days. All that stuff is online. Days like this are, about how we move the industry forward. And we readily invite you all to participate in the discussion. We have all you have to do is, if you have a blog and you think that you're writing anything that you feel is relevant or is about the experimentation of new models, new ways to distribute, new ways to help films be discovered, all you need to do is tag or categorize it with From Here to Awesome and/or FH2A. And then we'll find you and we'll put it into the aggregation of all of it, and then that's available for everybody and it's archived. So that's kind of our newest approach towards an open distribution kind of discussion of information kind of thing. So, and here are the domains, and so what I'd say is, what we always say, when we do our stuff is, if you find yourself in a situation where you've experienced something, and no matter if it was positive or negative, the sooner that you can share it with somebody else, hopefully it avoids the situation for them. And the more open we are about the models and what we're doing and what works and what doesn't work, the more likely we'll be able to move towards that ability to fund, create, distribute, and sustain our work. So thank you very much. Questions? Okay, so I have time for two questions.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for the presentation, and a lot of really exciting ideas about distribution. I just wanted to ask what role you see for theatrical in this kind of new distribution landscape, because I, for one, just think watching a film online is a bit rubbish compared to watching it at the cinema. And that's why I think the guy from Brazil is a bit of a hero, because he's taking the Web 2.0 ideas and using them for theatrical distribution. So kind of how do you see theatrical in this, in your kind of thinking?
Well, I think theatrical is a valuable asset. I think it's just changing the mindset of how you deal with theatrical. I think it's moving away from the fact that it has to be a theatrical release that's traditional in the sense of trying to get a 2-week run in a theater, and more about, like, I'm very interested in event-driven theatrical presentations. They pay me more, they're easier to pull off, and they honestly have more, they're more valuable to me personally. But I think, you know, the idea of community and audience moving across all these things, and a lot of the work that I do, it kind of moves in a circle. You know, I want to get somebody to be online, then I want to get them to interact on a mobile phone, and then I eventually want to break them out into the real world so they can meet each other. So, but now when they meet each other, it is actually like a communal experience as opposed to going to the movies and you sit there. And I honestly can say a lot of times I'm annoyed by the person who has their cell phone on or is chewing too loud in my ear or is talking through the film. I've seen things where people get together and now they know each other, and they might know each other by a screen name or something, but they might be a Facebook friend or something, but they're right there. So in all, I think theatrical is important. You know, I think it's just a matter of having perspective around it and making it more valuable for yourself. So it's rooted directly in all the models that I do and all the things that I'm working on.
Wait, just briefly, what do you mean by event-driven?
Event-driven, basically meaning like find some way to, you know, whether you're teaming up with other films and putting it on together, or a lot of the times I've done like live gaming events and had it parlay into the film where the characters are interacting with the participants in the audience via cell phones, you know, so the characters from the movie are talking to them, you know. It just depends. I mean, finding the hooks that you have and pushing it towards event. I mean, that's just my own opinion. Like the next film that I'm doing has a whole like 3D component. You know, it's going to be serialized in certain ways and then broken off into the real world, compiled into a much larger narrative, and then day and dated, but there'll be live theatrical events. So. Oh, yes, yes. The one thing, speaking of communal, speaking of theater, theatrical experiences, we have two of the From Here to Awesome films whose prize was they were brought over to London here. I Fucking Hate You is the name of the short film, and In Search Of. They're playing tonight. I strongly encourage you guys to check them out. They're both wonderful films. The filmmakers are in attendance here, so they'll be able to answer questions, and they can tell you directly about all the steps through going through the model that we laid out. So, well, thank you very much.